dear guests, friends, colleagues. It's very, very nice, and I'm so thrilled that you all came today to visit us. I have to close the music, I think. I can feel it. Boom. My name is Tanya. I'm CEO here at 𝐿. 𝐿 is since 2001. We are a trust, and we use all this agriculture. What we have, we use that to help disabled people to gain trust in themselves and make them thrive. So they really can see the point in fulfilling their dreams to get to work or go further in education. So that is we use those methods called social farming, the principles what we are doing here at the farm. We have over 20 years experience in ecological agriculture. And in the last couple of years, we have been we have this vision that we have to go from ownership to access to. And in that process, we have invited very good people inside to help us to fulfill the dreams about this regenerative agriculture and the production of food. And in, what is it, 2 years ago, 𝐿? What, last year? I think 1.5 last spring. We saw each other and love at first sight. Like that, I think. So that was the first journey. And I think we will have a long relationship. Yeah. We have to make something big here with this forest. So, and of course, because of you, and you have been studying with Ernst, and therefore we are here today, all of us. So would you please give it up for the two? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'll just make a very brief presentation, and then I'll turn it over to Ernst. So my name is 𝐿, and I would say I'm a very novice student of what Ernst is trying to teach and his methods. So I live in the city. I didn't have any land, so I got the opportunity here to come and try. Should I stand on this side? So we started a very small experiment on a field here at 𝐿. It's about 800 square meters. And here we planted these special tree lines that are supposed to produce different fruit and nuts. And inspired by the methods that Ernst teaches, where you really try to mimic kind of a succession of species so that you have you support the trees that you want to have along the way so that they are strong and resilient and produce well. So I've planted a couple some lines last year, which are growing, and then Ernst is here now, and we are trying to improve and change and learn more ways of doing it. So this week we've been planting a few more rows, also focused on fruit and nut trees and berries, and also vegetable production in the start. So from this system, I harvested a lot of garlic and salad and radishes and fennel, different veggies. And the garlic, some of the garlic we're planting again. And these are kind of the support species in the start while the forest is growing up. And this is just a few pictures of the rows that we've planted and seed mixes of tree seeds we made and potatoes. So this is a different time of year to plant potatoes. So we'll see. I'll make a record next year. I trust Ernst that it works. So, and this is kind of the future vision of a 5-hectare field that we would like to implement some of after Ernst's method. So we've also discussed ideas on this trip. And I just very briefly want to say why I'm so inspired by Ernst and excited by his way of looking at the world. So I think also for me, the planet is a living organism and it needs ecosystems to function. It's kind of like its organs. And when we humans, you can go to the next. There's a certain natural processes that happen and how ecosystems come about, how they function, and their dynamism. And humans often plant in a very different way. We simplify things. A lot of times we have monocultures that are very far away from these natural processes and systems. So I think this is why we have kind of the challenges we have that we call climate or biodiversity crisis. And I think it would be more exciting to get closer to how nature works and integrate ourselves into it. So if you go to the next. So this is another kind of thinking that I would like to think in a different way, because we say humans do these kinds of things, these monocultures and mining the soil and things that make it then not possible for us to use the soil. And then we think of nature as something that only can be there if humans are kept out of it. And that's why I think I'm so excited, or I like how Ernst thinks, because he has shown us how humans need to be and can be an integrated part of an ecosystem and of nature, and we are actually nature. So I think we should also act in this way and be beneficial to the land that we're working with. So the next one. So I want to just show briefly before Ernst comes on, basically how this looks. So Ernst is not just a person who talks, he has really done it in Brazil where he lives, and he's been many places also to help others implement the same thing. So this is a short film of Ernst's house and his farm and how he farms. So I think if we think about farming, we wouldn't get this image. But in Denmark, we're also a forest ecosystem, the original one. So my dream is that farms could also look like this, not with these species, but as forests. So a little video, and then I'll give it over to Ernst.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ernst Götsch. I'm a farmer since more than 60 years. First in Europe, a certain time after studies, I dedicate myself to plant improvements. That's to say, yeah, to plant improvement, genetics, and that work brought me to the conclusion that it perhaps could be more efficient and more intelligent to focus on the ecosystems or the conditions we offer to our species, instead of trying to adapt the plants. On each step we deplete our soil, destroy our ecosystem, that's to say worsening the conditions we offer to them, adapting them. We did first with this, it's an old history, yeah, man, since 12,000 years, since the beginning of this warm period, after the great icy period, when he occurred about 35 to 45,000 years ago. Modern man, not our ancestors, but modern man. He occurred made for living and be useful in that ecosystem. Opla, ja, disculpe. In that ecosystem, which was steppe all over the world, even the place where I'm living at the moment, in the tropics, in the eastern part of Brazil, Bahia, which is just in the middle from the north to the south, 15 degrees south, and about 300 meters upon sea level, 50 kilometers from the sea direct line, from the sea. And it's since about 12,000 years, it's a forest before, during the icy period, and more even 30, 40 to 20,000 years ago, it was a dune. That's to say, it was dry, no forest. And then forest came back. And this happened all over the world. Man, at the end of the last icy period, or let's say in 20,000 years ago, he lived in an environment where 88% was steppe or open forests. Open forests, yes, open savannas. And the few parts which were really forests, tropics, they were nearly inhabited. And then, with the change of the climate, some 12,000 years ago, man lost his habitat. And instead of, in my interpretation, instead of looking for or figuring out a niche to be useful in a new ecosystem, he decided to remove the forest which came up. And he does it up to now. We see it all over the world. Nowadays, they blame Brazilians that they are cutting the forest. But Europeans should be ashamed. They cut down more forest than any other civilization, any other people all over the world. We still see it all over the world. That's the rest over still the Amazon in Brazil. This is true. By incidents, we came to conclusion that when Portuguese and Spaniards came to that place, there lived, we don't know exactly, but between 20 to 30 millions of people in the Amazon. And that forest, great part of it, it was still visible up to 30, 40 years, 50 years ago, before the great next invasion by European people, that to say, by Brazilians in this case, and from the other side, Spaniards, to the Amazon, because we see it's clear there are many species which have co-evolution with man, and for example, Brazil nut, manioc, cassava, and then many fruit trees. They have co-evolution with man. By incidence too, quinoa, and which is from the highlands of Bolivia, and that too has a co-evolution with man, together with the animals there. It's the llama, and then in a forest, a tropical forest, Brazilians, as I said, and cassava. Cassava is not from the Amazon. It had been brought by man from the place where I'm living, a little bit more in the inner side of the continent, about 200 kilometers more west. It's a dry forest, and from there is still the origin. If you fell a forest, about 150 to 200 different genotypes of cassava come up. And if you cut nowadays in those places, as long as we don't use, don't plow and don't use glyphosate, still 30 to 50 different genotypes come up, despite of the fact that it had been in the last 1.5 centuries. Every time in shorter periods, felled, that's to say, submitted to slash and burn, felled and then burned and planted cassava once again and once again. Okay, man, an animal from a steppe, or so to say, a species of a steppe, and he, as I said, he decided to remove forests, and we do it up to now, all over the world. And so I said to you, not for living in Brazil, what Brazilian does is nothing different than what we did and do still. We look at Europe, Sweden, then the Baltic countries, Poland and other places, removing forest. Russia, removing forest. France has not much more forest to remove. And if you look at the Netherlands, how many percent they have forest? Forest, zero. Yeah, I have some plantations. How much forest do you have here in Denmark? Close to zero. Yeah, we have a lot of plantations too in Brazil. You know, there were about, I don't know exactly, but maybe 18 million hectares of eucalyptus. It's a small piece only. all eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is the same thing as your forest. It's not different. That's to say, it's the same thing. Then we have an Amazon forest. If Europeans and Chinese, but Europeans buy a lot, wouldn't buy soybeans to give to their cattle and to their pigs, Brazilian wouldn't fell the wood. And then they use, that's the same first place is Monsanto and Bayer, and Bayer is now Monsanto, Monsanto is Bayer. Europeans won again, once again. They sell the medicine to plant those, that's to say, the poisons to destroy those ecosystems. Once, first to control invasive plants. There are any invasive plants on this planet? There are any invasive plants on this planet? I believe not. That's to say, I've never seen an invasive plant. I have seen invasive people. but not invasive plant. And I work now since more than 60 years as professional in agriculture, and I never have been stolen by plant. Never heard a lie or something, other tricks by plants in order to trick me out. There is ethics and relations between different species and in a different species is based, I'm sure, and I act on that, unilaterally on unconditional love and cooperation. No competition. Competition we see in our mirror. And we interpret this as competition. If I have so-called weeds invading, occupying my agriculturally used, or that is my land, or my land, then it's not invasive. It's coming in order to improve soil conditions. We are coming now from a small place, 5 hectares we looked at some half an hour ago or 1 hour ago, and there are a lot of thistles and dandelions and other plants indicating that the soil is seriously compacted. And so that thistles are not invasive. They came in order to perform or to realize their task, to fulfill their function, to improve the soil. And if we would, go away of that place, I'm sure after a few years we would have a new secondary forest. And after, same as in Chernobyl, after 15 years it would be a forest, and it would be a stronger forest than in any place where we are making intervention. And at the same time, man gave to himself, it were Europeans, proudly and arrogant, in an arrogant way, the name of Homo sapiens sapiens. I don't only see anything of sapiens, I only see that he behaves as Homo destructor, ignorance. This, yes. Okay, let me see now, or let you say now what I believe, no, what I'm doing agriculture. What I'm doing here in the tropics, there in this picture in the tropics, Geneviève, you could pass a small of those movies, film I made before I left the farm. That one with the corn. Only in order to give an idea. Yeah. In fact, what I'm doing it now in the tropics. But I'm working also in all different type of climates. For example, in the end of last century, in the beginning of this century, I did several works in highlands of Bolivia on 5,000 meters upon sea level, 5,300 to 4,800 to 5,300 meters upon sea level is the surrounding of the Salares of Uyuni, and there it's quite cold. It can have frost every day of the year, but it's a place of origin of quinoa, a very important cultivated plants of the Aymaras and Quechuas, people there, and it's a place for llama. And when I came there, there was in 2 places where we passed locals told us the same account. They gave us the same the same account that black tiger had attacked panther. Has attacked. In order to know what it is, it's a predator, a cat. It can come to 4 meters length from tail to head, and 250 kilo. It's a very big cat. It's a very big cat. And so the tiger, as they called, they had attacked the llama. And then you have to know that in that place, it's highland, and it's covered, the place, or it's covered, it's cut with hundreds of kilometers of walls, or of rows of walls, yeah, of stones, more or less this height and about 2 meters width. It's clear it's not a fence. It's something like a guide for the animals. And in the upper parts, the pieces or the cells are bigger. They might come to 100 hectares or more. And in the lower parts, they are smaller, 2-3 hectares or half a hectare. And so they said to me that they remembered, or let's say the older ones had said to them, told them that in former time, they, before the Spaniards came, they had the llamas in springtime, October, November, in the lower parts. And then the cat didn't attack it. Let's just say the tiger didn't attack it. Oh, it makes sense. For me, it made sense. They didn't know, they had no answer for that fact. But for me, it made sense. It's for me clear. It's a co-evolution between the predator, the llama, predator for llama, the llama, man, and quinoa and potatoes. Potatoes are from that place. Not the potatoes, potatoes, the ancestors of the potatoes we eat are from that place. Small, they're very, very good. Nutty flavor and extremely good. And so they brought those animals to one of those places, let's say of one of those cells, and I asked to give me permit to bring me to that place. And so I saw that the llama, they browsed all the bush trees, all the secondary forest trees. They're in that place. They don't grow more than 1 to 3 meters height, maximum 3 meters, not 3 meters, 2.5 meters, half a meter to 2.5 meters. And in between there is the pampa grass. Sometimes we see it in Europe to plant it. It's pampa grass. Other animal doesn't eat it, but it seems that llama eat it. They browse it. And so they brought me to the place, and it was all pruned. And a llama, it deposits its feces in heaps of about 50 to 100 liters. They are both like this, similar to that of goats. Only of goats are small, and sheep are smaller even. But they are dry, and they deposit it. In any case, it's very dry there. They have about 80 to 150 millimeters of precipitation, but this corresponds to this climate here, to more or less 600 millimeters of precipitation. You have to consider altitude, latitude. 5,000 meters above sea level is quite cool, quite cold. Okay, and so I said to him, I could come, I could return. Could we perhaps plant next year some quinoa here? It's prepared for quinoa because since the Spaniard came to that place, they taught people that it's not intelligent what they do, that they should use an axe, you should use a knife and a hoe in order to get rid of those grass, and an axe in order to get rid of the trees, and then plant quinoa. Quinoa is a plant which Quinoa real is a plant which grows about 2.5 meters tall, and on that places they harvest from from 3 plants. They plant together. Seeds, perhaps you know, it's more or less of a size of let me see, sesame, of radish seeds. This you know better. Of radish seeds, more or less of that size, a little bit little, smaller, yeah, but radish seeds, yeah, it's all okay. And it gives 3 kilo. That each plant 1 kilo. And nowadays, in a mechanized way, they harvest 1,000 to 1,500 kilo per hectare, which is very, very few. And so they said, yeah, we plant it in next September, let's say after in fall of winter time, beginning of springtime, before the vegetation begins to grow. Make a small hole, and then small 3 centimeters. Put 3 seeds in it, and 3 or 1 piece of feces of this balls of feces of the llama. And so I went there next September, and it was just in the beginning of September, and we planted it. And then in May I returned. We harvested 13,000 kilo of quinoa per hectare. We planted it 1.20 meter from one to another, and more or less 3 kilo for each plant, sometimes a little bit less. And potato, just in the cross point of the crossing of the diagonals between the 4 quinoa planted in square. Yeah, and the same amount, or the same weight, amount of potatoes. Small potatoes, but very, very good ones. Agriculture in a different way. And it was interesting, during the next summer, the bush trees of that forest and the grass, the pampa grass, grew again. They're beautiful. So next autumn, they can return or could return to do the same. Agriculture, producing much more than we are producing. When you have animals to do this job, it's marvelous. Nowadays, our llama could be cattle, or cattle. But we could think about this too. But cattle is not is not big enough, big enough in order to prune our trees. And so we have to do it in a different way. I'm working with together with my son too in Switzerland, and I'm working in other places. And before I went to the tropics, I planted first. That is, when I stopped or decided to stop working in plant improvement, I tested first crop rotation. Crop rotation, we had complex types of crop rotation. One of the, as I said, I will only cite some ones which my father still did. When it was a clay, more heavier soil, more clay, it was a 6-year rotation, 3 years clover grass, and then 3 years open land. First year turnip, and second year wheat. Second year wheat, and after wheat still. Happened often. He had 2 options. One was after wheat. He harvested as all people all people all over the world. That is in all planets. They did it up to the 50s all over the world. Harvesting also here in Denmark. They harvested their cereals when physiologically ripe. This would be looking at wheat at the point when the grains don't have more water in it. That's to say, when you squeeze it, It's no more water in it. But water, it gives no more milk. But it's still soft. And if you chew it, you have afterwards chewing gum in your mouth. And it's at the point when a weed, when it flowers, it's like this, isn't it? And then it begins to ripen, and the more it progresses, when it is more or less this, then it's physiologically ripe, and then it's like this. Then it's morphologically ripe. And if you look at the interaction of that cereals to the place, in the beginning it grows slowly, and then it creates, little by little, step by step, it's by the use of its microorganism, the conditions to grow fast. It comes in a phase of fast growing, very fast growing. Here it might be between mid-April and mid or end May when it flowers. It might be here a little bit more north than Switzerland. It might be end of May, beginning June. It flowers. And then it's the peak of activities. And then when it's coming to physiologically ripe, it's more or less 45% still of it, what it did, it had capacity, 40%. But it had of capacity when it was in the phase of fast, of vigorous growth. And if you cut it at that time, you have a better quality grains. It has more vitamins. It has a better taste. It's better bread. More ferments and more enzymes than when it's morphologically ripe. Then it is not dead, but nearly dead. The bread is no more as good as it was. Perhaps here are some old people who remember still that they harvested and then put it in bundles in a field and the cover with another bundle just upon. And the grains in this case had something like a golden color. That's to say, it was not pale brown or gray. It had a golden color, and the grain was bigger. Okay, nowadays we have, that's to say, in the 50s, Americans brought us the harvester, and the harvester is not equipped to harvest the corn in that way. And so we come to morphologically ripe, then you have no more left over of those of the work of the microorganism of our plants. And the next generation of plants, they have to create once again their conditions, that's to say, and raise them. And this costs a lot, and so we have to give fertilizer. But this is a big business for some people, and so they recommend that we have to do it. And at the same time, if you harvest it when morphologically ripe, the soil compacts much more because it dies a little bit. That's to say, it's a dying process. And so, in former time, that's to say, my father did it too. Harvested corn. That's to say, wheat, not the corn, but wheat and rye and spelt, beginning mid-July, and at the same day, he planted the next crop. It was normally oats and Vicia sativa. Vicia sativa. What's the name of Vicia sativa in English? Veg. You're right. Oats and veg, and sometimes some other stuff still. And then that he cut mid-October to end October, and giving that to the cattle, he had to give them fibers in order to avoid that they get diarrhea, and they gave a lot of milk doing that. So he needed no soya beans to get a lot of milk from his cows. Another possibility or another option he did too, in February, March, beginning March, when the winter was not just at the end, but then it began to get green a little bit. He broadcasted Trifolium alexandrinum or Trifolium persicum, that's Persian or Alexandrinum clover, and Lolium italicum. No, not Lolium italicum. Lolium westerwaldicum. This is Westerwaldish ryegrass. It seems it has the same name in English because it comes from a scientific name. Broadcast that upon and then rake upon in order to fix a little bit the seeds. And so, beginning July, that grass and the clover was more or less this height, and we used long straw, or he used, or it had been used long straw cereals, and he always planted at least 3 types of cereals together, even if it was from the same species, about 60%, 65% of a medium high or lower, the lower at that time was his height of wheat, and the higher one of 190 more or less, and then another one of 2 meter 10, 2 meter 20, 5% only that one. And this had the effect that when the wind blew, the grass fixed it a little bit, and then the medium one, the lower one, also fixed it, helped the higher one, and the higher one bent, and then the next one bent, and the next one bent a little bit, but it didn't fall down. And the straw was all beneficial for the place. And the lower part he used for fibers in autumn time, because in the same crop rotation, the first time, in more sandy places, which he had 2, he planted in springtime potatoes, covered it with straw and a thick layer of straw, bed of the cattle, but a lot of straw in it. And so it was not been planted into the soil, but upon the soil. And no need for pesticides, no need for insecticides, nothing at all, and easy to harvest because the plant, when it ripens, you can get it out, and all the potatoes are just hang on the roads still. And so it was one of his income, substantial part of his income, planting potatoes in those sandy parts. One, as I said, first year when in sandy parts. Okay, crop rotation. And then returning now to the last year of the crop rotation, he planted different things. Sometimes it was after wheat, which he did too. He planted, once again, oats, a little bit Westerwaldish ryegrass, a little bit clover, and vetch. And together, about 20 kilo of spelt per hectare, and 10 kilo of 7 kilo of a long one, a medium long one, and then about 3 or 4 kilo of a very long rye together. That block, or that vegetation planted just after harvest of the wheat, when it was physiologically ripe in the beginning of July, until mid-October, end October, it was oats began to flower, and so it was at the point to give to cattle, and it was the same thing, he had to give fibers to that. And after, and in sandy places where he planted potatoes, once every 4 years, he planted just after early potatoes. He had potatoes, you can still buy it in Switzerland from an organization, it's called Pro-Especies Rara. Potatoes which you can harvest after 2 months. That is a 2-month potato. It's very tasty and it produces a lot. And he planted them end of March, beginning April, in a lot of straw. As I said to you, this much of straw, together with a little bit, that is cow dung. He gave it to the cows and then bring it out together with the feces of the cows. And so no problem with frost, because when you have frost, you had sun the day before, and so the sun heats up a little bit that straw, and so you have no frost upon. And then if you would have frost, it's only the upper leaves which can suffer a little bit, because they hide themselves a little bit in the straw. And then end of May, it was at the point to be harvested, beginning June. Then he planted corn, and corn, also oats, and a little bit veg, and peas. This he harvested at mid-September to mid-October. Also, he had to give fibers in order to avoid that the cattle became tired from that fodder. So he had always 2 harvests. Sometimes he always also after wheat he planted yellow turnip to be harvested in October, end of October too, given to the cattle. Once again, it was necessary to give fibers in order to equilibrate the fodder from them. And so he had an excellent fodder. In winter time, until January, February, he had a lot of apple and pear trees, and he made the juice on the farm. And so he gave the rest, the triple, to the cattle, which was together with turnip, in order to increase the appetite of the animals. And so he had a considerable high milk production. And additionally, cow, at that time, it lived 25 years, 30 years, giving every year a calf without medicine, without a doctor, without anything, only receiving a good fodder. Your food be your medicine, also for cattle. I know that he didn't get 12,000 liter milk, or 15 or 20 per cow. It was in fact about 4,500 liter. But when the cow lives 25 years and gives his 23 calves, it's very cheap. And if you need no concentrate, no extra fodder, only hay, grass, and what you produce on the farm, it perhaps would be a little bit more profitable than what we do nowadays, because nowadays a cow giving 20,000 liters, normally it doesn't support to do that more than 2 or 3 years. That's to say, latest 4 or 5 years, it's the end of its life. And then I wouldn't like to be cow to do that, and also the milk is not good, and it's not good for our health. And so we could think about. Once again, could now be agriculture. In Central Europe, I have to say that the photos we still have from the landscape in Switzerland, probably you have it too from Denmark, from the 20s or from the beginning of the last century. In fact, in my case, we have the photos of nearly of the whole country, and the place I born, it was completely different in the beginning of last century. At that time, they still had every 15 to 25 meters a hedge, and the hedge pruned every year. And then in the middle of the stripes, between the hedges, they had a row of fruit trees. apple trees, pear trees, plums, whatever you want, and in between some every 10 meters, 15 meters between the trees, a poplar tree, and then underneath a row, just in a line of the fruit trees, a row of berries. Red currant, black currant, gooseberries, and the material of the, let's say the pruning, the material of pruning, or the branchlets of the pruning of the fruit trees, they had been organized in a stripe, both sides, in a bed, both sides, underneath the trees and the berries. So it was easy to manage, and let's say to manage, no problem with even a small machine we had to cut the grass or to harvest the cereals. And then there was an art, let's say they looked for the composition of plants, let's say a lot of focus on late, how it's called, flowering apple and pear trees, in order to give the cereals underneath to be planted, let's say in between, to be planted, and give them the winter cereals, not summer cereals, to give the possibility to flower before the full set of leaves of the trees. And in any case, they grow much more before. It's winter cereals, they grow much more before the trees have their leaves, and so no problems. And afterwards, harvest was normally quite a lot underneath the trees, and so and even more the old varieties. We still have some of those old varieties, not many, but we still have, and they are more shade resistant, and they are better adapted for the climate than the new ones. And the new ones, in any case, I wouldn't plant them because they are not able to do what people believe that they are doing. This is regenerative agriculture. I don't live in Europe, but I listen sometimes and see sometimes what they are doing, and they're saying if you have some crop rotation, some animals in between, it's so-called how it's called, their cattle operation, all sustainable. I don't know. I never have seen a grass or a herb to build up significantly soil. It is able to give a slight brown or red, brown or black color to the soil, but it lacks something completely, which is fungi, or nearly completely, and overall fungi, which give the health, indirectly the health to our cereals, to our vegetables, to the plants we use, and also and so this lacks nearly completely. Additionally, all those plants, all cereals. Yeah, it's good. I suppose it is one of these.
Shall I show you? Let me know when.
Yeah, and then we could afterwards. I will come to the point that I'm planting. That I'm planting together with tree, but now I'm more extreme even. I'm planting in the cocoa plantation, and it functions. Yeah. It's I have 1,100 and something cocoa trees, and I have for each cocoa tree mother tree, that's a tree upon, and I prune that mother tree every top, that mother tree every year. Cut all the branches, all the branchlets, and let it on its skeleton without leaves in wintertime. And in wintertime or late wintertime. And then in early springtime, this year I did the same. The first time I plant corn and beans and vegetables in between, but this later on. Coming back to Europe, to our operation in Europe. Now I was interrupted where I was. Franchise. Yeah. All our cultivated plants, annuals, biennials, they in species succession, in their occurrence, in their the place of their place in species succession, in our ecosystem, is in the moment or at the moment when a forest or a big tree or a forest is breaking down. Let's say it's a small clearing or a smaller or bigger clearing. Then you have a lot of fungi in the system, and it's exactly the place where our plants occur. It's their place. There are some ones which are also of a forest, wheat, that is the cereals, but they are more of a savannic system. If you look to the Mediterranean, wheat the origin of wheat is Turkey. Origin of barley is Romania, Bulgaria, and then Germany. No, not oats. Oats is Bulgaria, and Germany is barley, and Eastern Germany and Russia is your rye. Is rye, and so, but they are all part of a forest. As I say, they are of an open forest, and animals manage it, and you can test it. It functions very well. It's not necessary to plow. You can plant it. We will perhaps one day. You plant 1,000 or 2,000 trees. Let them grow first, and when you have a beautiful young forest, plant fast-growing trees to consider that you will it have easier if you plant it in straight rows or in rows, civilized, in order to facilitate your works and your work or your intervention. Then you can do it mechanized. But if you have now, once having that forest, so you can plant in late winter cereals, in late autumn time, you will plant it in the before July topped forest. You cut the branches of all the beech trees, of all the elder tree, of all this the ash trees and so on, in order to get more on the skeleton. And at that time, if it is beginning July, you can plant a late autumn crop, as I said to you. Different one which I've described you. It might be fodder for your animals, or it might be yellow turnip or something else, or vegetables. And then in late autumn time, organic matter you have a lot. You can plant your cereals into the field without any problem. We have machines nowadays to do that. And what we don't have, we have at least technology. It needs to construct the machines. In any case, I believe that we have to rethink the machines we have. Tractor, as we use it, it's something, for me at least, it's something between stupid and ridiculous. We compacted our soil, and we compact it every year longer. When we introduced the tractors in the beginning of the 50s, last century, we used a small tractor. There is still a small one outside, bigger than the smallest one we had. Then the soil was not yet compacted, and then the soil got compacted due to the use of the new machines we had, and more bare soil. We cut all the fruit trees in between. The hedges, they eliminated in the beginning of the 20s because they had been taught that it's cheaper to use nitrogen and phosphorus from a factory, which was a leftover byproduct or leftover product or capacity to produce for the First World War. And then it had been brought to the agriculture. And so they were recommended, farmers were recommended and paid for, to get rid of the hedges, which were a substantial and important element to have fertility in the soil. Later on I will come to that aspect. So you planted now end of November, end of October. Next springtime, cereals, end of March, might be this height. End of April, it's like this or like this or like this. And it will flower. And they will grow together with the trees. The trees, if you prune them, or let's say top them, beginning July, they will make small branches like 10, 15 centimeters, each one about 3, 4, 5 buds. And so next springtime they nearly explode. And so they produce a lot of organic matter. Once again, a lot of leaves, a lot of growth, and the fact of having been topped, this induces that tree or those trees to send codified exudates, let's say assimilados, to the part of their mycorrhism of bacteria, fungi, and other ones which live close to their rootlets, to produce growth hormone for them. And these growth hormones, for plants not being egoists nor autists, they are all linked in the soil by the mycorrhism, which they share together. Let's say it's over the position of the mycorrhism. If you look in a microscope, you see that each rootlet of the plant is accompanied, it has in surrounding at least 1 centimeter, 3 or more centimeters of a spongy, fluffy mixture formed spongy, fluffy mixture of bacteria and fungi, which is so-called ectomycorrhism, which are do the same thing as our bacteria in our belly or in the mouth. Let's say they help. In fact, they do the job of make available nutrients and make available or produce certain substances plant needs. If a plant needs water, it goes to the fungi. Fungi gives a little bit codified once again for that fungi, for a certain type of fungi. I need water. Okay, it gives a little bit of exudates, and then the fungi, oh yeah, okay, I will get water. It can go 2 meters, 3 meters in order to get water, because the hyphens of the fungi, they occupy the biggest fungi. It can occupy 3, 4, 5, 6 or 10 hectares. That is a big fields. But also the smaller ones we don't see from bare eye. They go 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters in order to get water. And then I need some potassium. Okay, available. So it's once again codified for the microorganism which is able or equipped to do that. It will do it. It gives a little bit exudates, and then it will do it. We should study microorganism. Let's say the life in the soil, and if we would study it and understand, we would come to the conclusion, we would see the idiotic idea we have to give so-called fertilizer to the plants. You ever imagined that if you had no life on the planet would be something, a mixture between Venus and Mars? No life. Water would come back to the planet, a lot of wind, cold at night time, hot. At daytime, lot of storm. Since 3.5 to 4 billions of years we have life on the planet, and life has created a condition for more life on the planet, and each time more conditions. And only man, modern man, he came to the conclusion that he has to do what other ones do much more, much smarter, much more intelligent, less energy, and in a much better way. And so, nutrients. Hans-Peter Rusch, a scientist of the last century, microbiologist, he appointed in his research, he came to the conclusion that in a medium, so-called fertile, loamy soil here in Central Europe, we have potassium for at least 80 million years to harvest every year 4 to 6 tons of cereals. It's quite a lot. 50, 60, 70 millions of years. The places will be different. That to say, the planet will have made a lot of modification, or has suffered and suffered. He will bring new minerals to the top, and so it's not necessary. The same thing as phosphorus. Phosphorus you have sufficient. There is no problem. I am working in the tropics on places where I had been told, and I can read also in the literature, scientific research, is that the place I bought, it's not adapted and not at all recommendable to plant cocoa, because pH 3.7 to 4 and only traces of phosphorus and nearly no potassium, and aluminium and toxic concentration. In a minute, 10 years later, after beginning, without the use of fertilizer, only using natural processes, or employing natural processes, they blamed me that I bought the best land of the whole region. And in the meantime, everybody is convinced that the gringo has the best soil. There's no better soil, because his cocoa has no diseases, no pests, and produces a lot. And every day, every time or every year, it's more vigorous, produces more. And then additionally, it's raining all the time, let us say, much more on the place of the gringo than on other places. And so they believe that I'm something like, how it's called, a male witch?
A warlock.
A warlock, yeah, that I'm a warlock. They are convinced because it rains on my place and it doesn't rain in the surrounding. And so something is not correct. And also they are convinced that planting so much it will produce nothing. But we can't, as Schopenhauer said 170 years ago, or wrote in his œuvre. Let me translate it into English. I can't. One of his œuvres. He said that man only can understand what he learned, that it exists. And this is very true. Man can only he sees that something is different, but he can't understand, and so it doesn't exist for him. That's to say, he can't, he's not able to see that. And this is a great difficulty. And then there is another great difficulty, and this difficulty is semantic. That's to say, the language we use. It's also in fairy tales, in religion, in all places. We have, there's in all frontiers we have problems. That's to say, we have a long history of, let's say, the formation of our species, of our way of looking at the world and interacting. As I said to you, in my interpretation, man, 12,000 years ago, he lost his habitat, and he did not achieve up to now to be useful, to figure out a niche for him to be useful, to be serviceable to life. And this, I believe, this would be it's the only way that we can survive. Because if we look at different places, thousands of civilizations appeared. Many we know in the of history, but prehistoric, we only see some rests of civilization. And they disappeared, all of them, for the same reason. Conflict with the ecosystem. After the end of the last icy period, 88% of the places he lived turned into forest. And removing that ecosystem is lethal. We did it. And in the meantime, first he did it locally, then collapse. Destroying ecosystem, depleting resources. No more fertilizer, as I say, no more fertile soil, lack of water, and so on. And then, parallel to this, beginning to get scarce resources, war. Well, we are living here in Europe since a long time, and now they are doing the new experiment, despite of the fact that one of the wise men of our newer time or recent newer time, it was Mahatma Gandhi. He said that the only way to come to peace is a peace by itself. Is peace by itself. There is no other possibility. Producing arms and send to Ukraine, it doesn't give it's right. We have now 2 wars in Europe, from Europe, and now the next war, we knew this, we learned this, will be for Europe, and they do it. They do it. It's tragedy. But go back now to our agriculture once again. And so I was with the fungi, with the plants growing. If I would be asked to create a system here, I would do it in a similar way, because I went to the tropics, having done or tested exactly what I showed you here now. It's not, show it here. It's now in the tropics, but it's the same thing, but only a little bit more extreme even. Every year, I'm a cocoa farmer, since more than 40 years. No, you need a sound.
Maybe take the microphone over to the computer.
I take the microphone. Begin once again. And the microphone and computer.
We'll try.
No, it's here. Just a moment.
Yeah, begin once again. Well, I have to say, yeah, afterwards I will explain it.
So, here we go, I hope.
Perhaps. I have more or less 1,100 and something cocoa tree per hectare. And each cocoa tree has its mother tree. That's a tree upon it. And those trees I top.
To speak in the microphone.
Oh, yeah. I have, thank you. I have about 1,100 and something cocoa tree per hectare. Cocoa tree is more or less the size of a plum tree. And then each of those cocoa trees has a mother tree upon it. Tree a little bit higher. And I top that mother tree every year. Cut all the branches, let perhaps 2% or nothing of the leaves. This I do after harvest, after main harvest of the cocoa in late autumn. And on this spot I fell the rubber tree. Why doesn't it function now?
Okay.
Here we go. So the open became a little bit bigger, planted corn and planted vegetables. Vegetables were harvested and corn is now flowering. And the cocoa, it's returning, as I say, it's returning. It's recovering and the compensation will be more cocoa. And at the same time, there are corn, beans, vegetables, and then one cocoa tree which suffered from the impact of the tree. It's capucine here, and we will graft it. Next week we will graft it, and so in 2 years it will produce probably more than the plant we got there. And once again, we see here the corn, and then we transition to cocoa plantation. All integrated in the place. Well, did you know? A cocoa plantation is the same thing or similar to an apple operation or apple plantation or plum plantation. We could have, in fact, it's the same thing. It's similar, very, very similar to plum. Plum is a medium layer tree, and it would need somebody a tree upon it, and that tree you should top every year. This had been done in former time here in Europe, and apple tree, they are medium high, and they should have in between some emergent tree tools. We used in former time often the black poplar, and then they had been topped, not only pruned, letting only the cylinder with stumps of the branches every year. This resulted in high productivity of the apple. Trees, they lived 200 years, 250 years. I grew up in a place where we had a lot of apple trees and pear trees still. As popularly they said, it came from before the 𝐿andsknechtszeit, that's to say before the French Revolution. And then in the beginning of the 50s, they had been felled, paid by a state, subsidies. No, nearly forced to cut them. And then we counted really the rings they had, and there were many, many pear trees and apple trees which really had 250, 270 rings. That is a very, very old trees, and they produced a lot. We had pear trees which every year gave 500 kilo, 600 kilos of fruit. And I was 13 years when I got the first time in my life sugar. We didn't use sugar. We used a concentrate made out of pear juice. Still you can buy it in Switzerland. It's called bien-être. It's not more common, but you can buy it still. It tastes like honey, and it was a good sweetener. Let's say I loved it. That sweetener, and pears we had a lot. And overall pear trees which flowered very, very late. Normally at the time when the wheat or rye or spelt was flowering, that the winter cereals were flowering. So it was exactly synchronized. The yearly metabolism of the trees together with those cereals. Okay, back now to this operation. This operation, I said to you, I make every year, I top all these trees. It's an operation which costs to me, I have to do it by hand not, I have a small chainsaw. And so I spent about 12 to 15 days a year in order to prune all these trees and chop up the material, which by each side results in, we did it now this year the third time, an investigation which results in about 150 to 200,000 kilo of green matter per hectare, which corresponds to about 18 to 20,000 kilo dry matter, which is 4 to 5-fold more than a forest would recycle. A strong forest would recycle on the same place, the same site. Additionally, I have still nearly the same amount what a strong forest, a vigorous forest, natural forest was recycled. I get still from the cocoa, that is the leaves of the cocoa, branches of the cocoa, which I have to prune 6 times a year, because 6 times I have a new flush of the cocoa, and so I have to get off excessive growth like water shoots and other parts, and often they cross one another. They don't prune, and in any case, if you do that pruning, this stimulates the tree to do more vigorous growth. And then you have the leaf fall of the mother trees, and upon all these cocoa, underneath still some vegetation on the ground, and then cocoa tree, second layer, and then the mother trees, third layer, fourth layer, about 10 to 15 huge trees. Those I don't prune, but I prefer those trees which remain without leaves. That's to say, deciduous trees which remain without leaves in wintertime. So in wintertime, at the moment of pruning of those cocoa trees, it's all open, so I can plant vegetables and corn and beans in between small patches of the cocoa plantation. It's not an operation to produce thousands of tons, but it's sufficient for me, and that's to say, not only for me, for my neighbors, for friends, and whatever we want. It's a byproduct, a by-effect of the production of cocoa of high quality, and as one of the biggest or great by-effects I have an increase of at least half a centimeter to 3 centimeters of black soil every year. The pH, when I began, it was 3.7 to 4. Now it is 5.7 to 6.2, which is optimum for humid tropics. It should not be higher. Then you have the optimum pH. And we have the black soil now upon, and underneath, which was a yellow, pale yellow soil, it's now brown. That's to say, it turned. It's enriched very much in terms of organic matter. And if you believe or don't believe, but you have earthworms which weigh up to 300 grams. They are like snakes. If you see them the first time, you're sure, you believe to be sure that it's a snake. It when how it's called when in cold it's about 40, 60, 70 centimeters and it's thick, and when it's extended it's up to 152 meters. It's a big animal, and it's an animal which works vertically. That's to say, it goes down, and so the soil every year it's being deeper. That's to say, it's going downwards, and so this makes that the system is each time more resistant for droughts and for other problems, and much more every year more available minerals. We could do, it doesn't grow so fast here in Denmark, but we could do the same thing, because I tested it in Switzerland before I went to the tropics. It functions. It was exactly what the conclusion, to what I came. I said to you, first I tested crop rotation. Second, I tested combination, or let's say consortia between different species. One of the species, this was inspired after a visit in Latin America, corn and beans. If you plant corn and beans, two varieties which combine together, then if you have luck, you can plant both together. Normally beans grow faster, and so you plant beans a little bit later. When the corn has 4 leaves, you can plant beans, climbing beans. This results that your corn grows faster, is more resistant to drought, and produces more or less 30% more. Much higher, too. And then you have, additionally, you have still the beans, might be between 1,000 to 2,000 kilo of dry beans. This, if you don't eat it, cattle will eat it too. And so we would have corn and beans. And if you do that, you don't need any fertilizer, any pesticides. It's the beans, once climbing up, you have to do, or you have to make sure that it doesn't, that it isn't taller at the moment when it's flowering. It's not yet, how it's called, closed or tightened. The place where the how it's called, the cups of the tree of the corn comes out, because then the corn will not be able to be pollinized. But if you look or attain or achieve to get a good combination, which would not be very difficult to figure out, it's a question of tests, then the success is complete. Then in autumn time, the whole ground is covered with feces of earthworms, 1, 2, 3 centimeters. And if you then, end of October, mid-October, harvesting the corn, would broadcast before or simultaneously to the harvest wheat, you could harvest the corn about 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters upon the soil, and then shred the rest, and so the wheat would be, the seeds of the wheat would be covered together with some leaves, which fall down of the corn and of the beans, the rest of the beans. And then you need, once again, no fertilizer, nothing. And if you would now, or then in, once again, 2 or 3 varieties of wheat, long straw wheat, one 160, 170, the other one 180, 190, so 2 meters or 2 meters 20. The biggest portion of proportion of the lower one, 160, 170. And then if you would plant, or if you do, I tested it, plant in March, still peas, a long straw peas, into the field. It will grow and it will produce an extra, and your wheat will produce more. And so you have 2 crops once again, and much more straw. That's to say, all tested. I did it in the mid-70s, and it, I suppose, is not more different, not much different. 1977, we had a summertime similar to what you had, I believe, this year. It was dry? Yeah, this year it was dry. It didn't rain from mid-May until end July. No rain. Same thing as this year. This is not how it's called, a catastrophe. I divided my field. I hired a piece of land in order to test this, the different combinations or consortia in the field, and so I used the hybrids, the usual hybrids and recommended hybrids we had in that place, and looking also for the neighboring ones. And the neighboring fields, end of July, corn was this height, and so they decided to cut it because it was not able to produce. It began to flowering, but small cups, it's not. It makes no sense. And my corn, together with the beans, per definition of the institute who raised it or created it, 2.20 meters more or less height. It was 2.50 meters, and the beans, no problems of drought. And I divided the field in 4 different plots. 2 in opposite place in terms of diagonal, without beans, and the other one with beans. And the 2 ones without beans, they were like this, and the other ones were like that. And so it was not lack of water, it was a lack of intelligence. And so we could do quite a lot of things and improve a little bit. But still, as I said to you, for really regenerative agriculture, I came to the conclusion that we have to create agroforest or agroecosystems similar in their way of functioning, in their organization and stratification to the natural and original ecosystem. Here we would have a forest, 30 meters tall, and we can make agriculture, we can raise cattle, we can produce whatever we want, that's to say our cereals, without any problem. Only we have to prune, you have to learn to top trees and to prune trees. And when I did it in Brazil, it was now the first time mechanized. It was 2015. Then I had a visit. I constructed, because, due to lack of adequate machinery still, I constructed a tower on a tractor, which is not difficult, a tower, and so I was on the tower, on the platform, and I had a tractor driver underneath, and so I cut 1 eucalyptus tree after the other. 1 hectare, we spent about 6 hours to cut. We had in that field 2,222. That is every 1.5 to 3 meters, that is 1.5 meter from one to the other in a row, and every 3 meter, one row. We had an eucalyptus tree, and I cut all of them. They were about 8 to 12 meters tall, and so on. And I cut them 5.5 meters tall. Before we did that, about 2 months earlier, I cut all the branches to come to 5 meters, and so we had only 0.5 meter with some branches, and I cut them a little bit too, in order to shorten it a little bit. So it was open, and the organic matter we shredded. And this gave, in that case, it gave 5 centimeters of shredded material. I planted different things, corn, beans, soya beans, vegetables. It was impressive, simply impressive what you harvest in this case. And when we harvested the corn and soya beans, 3-4 months later, it was a forest. And we decided to prune it once again and plant the second crop. This you can do in Europe. You have not sufficient sunshine. But once a year, poplar tree, they do it, and willow tree too. We can do it. And we can plant also a lot of trees, and then we could top them. And then I had a visit of the owner of the biggest sawmill in Brazil. He came to visit me. He saw in the newspaper that I'm doing this, how it's called, a little bit not common type of agriculture and planting a lot of trees. And so he asked me to allow him to visit me. And when he came, he was excited. Ernst, if we could do it all over the world, this would be the biggest present for all owners of sawmills, because this results in a straight stem, cylindric, dense wood, a dense wood. It doesn't bend and doesn't split. Straight wood, cylindric. It doesn't bend when you saw it, and it doesn't split. It's a dream of all owners of sawmill. And so in this case, wood would be a byproduct, a by-effect of doing agriculture. And then you have a lot of organic matter on the soil. And we would, in this case, create soil. That's to say, we would get soil, and after the end of our life, we could pass our land to the next generation, happy and proud that we did a good job, that we were serviceable to life and useful. And useful for the planet. And this, for me, believe, could be one of the niches for modern man. Think about the significance of, in the meantime, 200,000 years that man turned to be the dominant big animal on the planet. That is the most dominant animal on the planet. And if you look at history of the planet, life for me is one of the tools, part of the instrumentarium, which planet created for itself to realize its strategy of being. And we cannot be owner of this planet. We are part of a macroorganism. And part of a macroorganism, if that part, or if parts of a macroorganism decide or act in a non-harmonious way, into the macroorganism, that's to say, compartment of autists or egoists, it turns into a cancer. And this induces at the same time modification in that macroorganism, which results that the presence, the future presence of that species becomes to be non-wanted, no more wanted. And this happened to modern man in the last 12,000 years many, many, many times. About 3,000 years ago, study history, all civilization on the whole world disappeared. We don't know why, but they disappeared. And the civilization which came up afterwards, one after the other, disappeared. The last big one here in Europe, which disappeared, was Rome. First, the western part of ancient, old Roman Empire. It disappeared 550 years after Christ. And they say that it was the Vandals, who destroyed that Rome and the Italian peninsula. But it was not the Vandals. It was Rome itself. It rotted, and the Vandals, they only passed in that's to say, in that part of Roman Empire, and city after city, they how it's called, stopped the transit on the excellent road road system Romans had, and cut the water supply for the cities, which was easy. Aquaconducto, the water conducts they had, the Romans, they were better than our system because they brought fresh water in curled way to the city, which when it came to the city was cooled down and clean. But they cut it off. And so after, if I remember correct, it was about 30 days. 300 inhabitants left over in Rome, not killed by the Vandals. Romans killed them themselves. Yeah. Then afterwards, some 1,000 years later, 1,100 years later, 200 years later, the Pope, it was, I don't remember, I would remember, think later, but it's not important. He went to England, and he visited England, and then he came to a church, and that is one of the churches, and there they distributed black stones to the inhabitants, and everybody was happy. And then he asked the priest, "What do you do? Why do people are happy receiving these black stones?" And then the priest explained that it's coal to heat the house. You need stones. You use stones. We use wood, because at that time Italy was one big forest. Once again, so this will happen when, or this happens when civilization is wiped out. Afterwards, nature comes back. The same thing. Yeah, I will stop. The same thing. Yeah. The same thing as in Chernobyl. You ever have heard of the development in the meantime of the ecosystem in Chernobyl? Yeah, Chernobyl has now, in the meantime, 30 years after the explosion of the atomic power plant, has a much stronger, a very vigorous vegetation on a place not adapted for man, for the presence of man, a lot of radiation. But there are they figured out that there are living a lot of animals and a lot of vegetation, strong vegetation, vigorous vegetation all over the place. And they figured out about 8 years ago that there appeared some exotics called, that is a bacteria, which make radiosynthesis. That is to say, they use radioactivity in order to get rid of, they eat it and make store energy, that energy, in the form of carbohydrates in their body. Yeah. Exotics. Only a small remark for notation for exotics. For me, there are no exotic species, no invasive species. I told it in the beginning. There are species which come or which appear, and they spread because they have something to do. They are not coming to steal, not coming to do something bad. They come in order to resolve. And so if I have thistles, it's not an invasive species, not a nasty species. It's a sign that the soil is compacted. And if you have some trees or something else, Ailanthus altissima, forbidden to speak, to say the name and to plant them more even, you go to jail. If you do it in the European community, it appears because you have destroyed the ecosystem. And it's the most efficient, they are the most efficient one. And we could try to figure out what they are doing and why they are doing it, and then employ them. This had been written some 2,700 years ago in Babylonia. There is written, transform your enemy in your right hand. Question, you will say it.
So we'll just take questions and...
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. You have to answer them.
Yeah, this I know, but you are the organizer. You are the organizer and have to say what is coming now.
Maybe you can go
The proceeding of... Yeah, the microphone for people.
Hello?
People need to come up and ask
Yeah.
questions.
I just pointed her out so you can do it.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. My question is about the Alan Savory method and what your opinion on his approach to regenerative farming is.
I admire Alan Savory. You have to see the place of origin of him. He comes from Zimbabwe. He comes from Zimbabwe. He was an Englishman who comes from Zimbabwe. He was born in Zimbabwe. I visited Zimbabwe and I worked a small time there in 1967. And Zimbabwe at that time, it was a paradise, more or less a paradise. It was a typical savanna. English, it had been transformed by English people, but they raised a lot of animals. It had a certain conservative cultivation of some cereals, but more animals. And there was in many, it was common in some way, a mixture of wild animals, of elephants and whatever you want, of lions and other things, together with the cattle of those people. I saw it days later on. I worked more than 1 year afterwards in Namibia. It was the same thing, the sub-desert, which I say that it's sub-desert, but it was a savanna too. It was not a desert. It's nowadays a desert. It turned into the desert. So Alan Savory, his hypothesis is, and it's not at all bad. No, it's very good. That if we would make a management of our ecosystem, of that type of our ecosystems, not of all ecosystems, with animals. There we had, in fact, in former time, my father, for example, he had his cows only 3 to 4 hours on one place. Only 3 to 4 hours. And then, what they didn't eat, they cut, and next day they went to, afterwards went to the next place. And this results that the vegetation might improve. But Now comes the next one. If you have a desert, as we did it now, or have it now, you look here in Denmark, it's the same thing. It's not necessary to go far. No more trees. And so how I can now establish those trees once again, it's not the same as you see often in those dry or semi-dry areas, northeast of Brazil. The trees are still present, as long as we don't use plow and don't use glyphosate. We have still a big pressure from a part of the trees. Then if you do there, an intelligent management is got forward. But if you would do it here in Europe, or in other places, Brazil too, where they have in the meantime 10,000 of hectares without any tree, you can't recover that place or get it back to forest or to a functioning savanna with cattle present, because they will eat the seedlings. And so you have to establish first those trees. And so I had a problem with one of the guys, which was together with me in a place of Josipa, coming with his management, holistic management. Yeah, it's all okay. Holistic management, which without any trees, it's not possible. It should be a forest. That's to say, we first would have to re-establish our forest, and then see also species succession. If you enter from that degraded places, compacted soil, some poor grasses, some poor herbs, cattle will not plant those trees. If you could give them seeds, but then you have to take them out, because if you return after 2 months or 1 month, they eat latest 5 months later, 10 months later, when the trees are like this, they prefer to eat that new apple tree and that new pear tree. That doesn't function. Also, all other trees, it might be an ash tree or a poplar tree. Cattle eat all. Once having established our forest, then we can return with cattle, and we should have to help them a little bit topping, because this was the case former time in Europe. We did it. That's to say, our ancestors, at least in Switzerland and northern Italy, which I knew, they did it. We had a lot of poplar tree, which was not pruned by cattle. It had been pruned by man. And then we had a lot of ash trees. They are partly, cattle did it because the hedges had been maintained this side or this side. So cattle pruned it. But that is, they had possibility to prune it. Then hazelnuts too, it could be, but then you have no hazelnut. And so we have to, we should make some intervention, that's to say, consider some intervention. But in any case, first we should plant a system which, that's to say, which those animals afterwards can manage. And then we come to Alan Savory.
Hello, Ernest, and thank you very much for all your inspiration. I have 2 questions for you. One is, how small a scale can your principles be done? Are we talking maybe 80 square meters? And the other question is, how do you place all the biomass, the mulch that you get from the trees when you prune them? Is there a special way to place it? Thank you.
The last question first. I put all organic matter in counterline, organize it in counterline. This has 2 reasons. One reason is to help to retain water, and the other reason is something very practical. In order to be easier, to get it reasonable to transit in the place, because I have to harvest my cocoa, I have to prune my cocoa, and so in order to facilitate that, I organize it in counterline, and I distribute it on the whole field. This is one. And then the second one, I did agriculture, even this is called urban gardening, even when I was in Berlin 2 years, or then in Cambridge, or in Zurich. I lived 8 years in Zurich, my life. Middle of the city, 4 years, and then 4 years let's say in a suburban area, but also a lot of houses. And my strategy to make agriculture were two. Once I made vertical and horizontal agriculture in my house. From the beginning on, I began to plant. In February, you planted tomatoes in your living room and close to the window, and then you have some herbs too to plant. And then when the springtime comes, you bring it outside, and then perhaps you have a terrace, you plant them too, and then you guide the tomatoes downwards and the beans upwards, so your neighbor will have a present too. Let's say he can harvest some tomatoes you have planted, and beans he will plant too. The upper neighbor will have beans, and the other neighbor will have tomatoes, and then a lot of herbs. And then I made a big box and brought some rainworms, earthworms too, to the place, and we made compost. And so we had, and then I began also on the roof. I had a lot of quarrel with the administration of the house, but in Zurich as well as in Berlin, not in England, I got a premium. It was a special, let us say, it was a man, the owner of the place, who was very, very happy that he, first time in his life, saw that he in his lawn, in his garden, in his house, can harvest all vegetables in best quality, and they are beautiful. They are they can be extremely beautiful too. And so I mixed them together with his ornamental plants, and then you can graft the trees in the city. Yeah? There are many beech trees, and you will graft some other, let us say, material of beech tree with big nuts. Beech tree has normally very small seeds. There are some ones which give bigger nuts. And then oak. Oak is one of the, well, it was staple food in former time all over the northern continent. In America as well as Europe, and in Asia too. And we still, when I was a small boy, there was a name for poor people, that it is an eichelfresser. That's to say, a person who has to eat oak. That's to say, how it's called, acorns. The acorns. And I ate as a child, not forced interest. It was my hobby. From 4 years, I still remember, began to eat them. There are acorns which are sweet and big ones. And so I began to test them, all of them, so I knew the best ones. Also beech, there were some ones who are tiny and they are not very good, and the other ones are bigger. So we could choose for them. And then you can do it in the city. It's not forbidden yet to graft all these oak and beech trees which are in the region. Go to the forest and graft them too. You can climb the stem, and then you graft them to have big ones. If you use them, there's these big ones. There are bitter ones, and less bitter ones are sweet ones. Bitter ones can be good too. If you are good, let's say if you are big, and if you put it in water, in cold water, and change water about 1 month, during 1 month, every day change, so they lose their bitterness, and they lose their astringency. And then you can peel them and chop them up, grind them, and then you make a silo out of it, that's a sauerkraut, out of it, and it tastes like fresh cheese. It's a marvelous food. It's a marvelous food. I wouldn't starve if there would be no supermarket, nothing more to buy. you can do agriculture if you have land or not land. You can do it. And it's not forbidden yet to plant some climbers to the trees in the cities. And then sometimes you begin to plant in a very tiny spot in the park. You plant some radish and some rucola. You make a compost out of organic matter. Good compost. We could teach how to do it yourself. You need nothing. You need a box. For a household, it's like this, a box like this, and then you make an inner box, more or less this distance from an outer box, with some small holes, and put all the material you have in the house, toilet paper, rest of vegetables, leaves, something which it's cleaning in front of the house, put all in that. And then this turns into an excellent compost. You have 3-4 boxes of this. This turns into an excellent compost. And that's compost you can use afterwards in order to make vertical agriculture or to plant in the park. That is in public places you plant rucola. And then they will, you will have a small quarrel. But insist, because it's not yet forbidden, you can plant it, and you can do it. It needs only this small spot of that lawn. You have to loosen and get off the grass a little bit, and then plant some seeds of rucola and put the rest of the roots. That's not the roots of the grass upon without earth, and so they will grow. Afterwards, you will enrich a little bit your place. 80 meters square which would be luxury. You remember, perhaps it existed here in Denmark, surely too. In 19th century, a German guy called Schreber, he recommended, and it had been done during the time of Bismarck, to give to people in the city 100 meters square of land to produce your vegetables. In Zurich, despite of the fact it was not fashion that a young man would have this 100 meters square, but I hired a small place, one of those 100, let's say, 100 meter square cells, and I cultivated all I need for me, for my friends, and for whatever you want. A lot of berries, a lot of vegetables. And I had sufficient vegetables, potatoes, and all, whatever, not cereals, but the rest, potatoes, vegetables, berries, I had sufficient for the whole year. Only out of those 100 meters square. And I had a lot of apple, a lot of cherry, a lot of pears. So you can do a lot of things, and this could be one of the measures we could take in order to incentivize people. This is the best life insurance. That is, what would be one of the life insurance we could do in order to avoid problems in times of crisis, and it would be a part of agro yoga and agro fitness. It would be much more intelligent, and it would cost less the planet than our academies we have in the cities offering yoga and jogging and offering fitness. That fitness is very cheap, and it's expensive in money, but it doesn't give the effect you would have. And if you did it planting your vegetables, your berries, your apples, and your potatoes, it could give more pleasure.
Hello. So one of the things that your farm in Brazil is known for is to bring the rain back to the area. So my question is, how many hectares of syntropic food forest do you estimate it will take to create a change at the microclimatic scale?
Yeah, I can give you an answer on this. For one side, I don't use the word syntropic agriculture. I created the word. When in 2016, I had a visit of two very worldwide famous scientists. And I showed them a place where I'm working. It was exactly that example where I topped eucalyptus planting, other things in between. And it was dry season, peak of dry season on that place, 4 or 5 months, normally 4.5 months, without any gutter of rains, and temperature during daytime between 25 and 35 degrees, and at nighttime 15 to 16 degrees, a lot of wind, dry season, all dry. And I planted, in order to for provocation, I planted exotics, only exotics, really for provocation. I would plant here this Ailanthus altissima too, in order to show that. I would prune in order to avoid that I can say that I planted it. I would look for a place with Ailanthus altissima, would top them and prune them and plant vegetables in between, in order to show that Ailanthus altissima is very useful and could do a very good job. There still are some spots, at least in Germany, a lot of Ailanthus altissima close to the high road, to the highway, and there are other places, abandoned places. Okay. In terms of area, to be completing syntropic agriculture, or syntropic agroforests. Then I had a place with bananas and eucalyptus upon, 2,000 eucalyptus per hectare and bananas underneath. Every 1 meter, 3 meter and a half row, and every 140 more or less, an eucalyptus tree, and every second eucalyptus tree in that row, banana, and then grass in between, and the grass cut 4, 5 times, 6 times a year, and organized in a double row to the eucalyptus banana. And just in the peak of the dry season, that visit, the bananas began to flower. They were very, very strong, without any sign of water stress. And close by, on the same field, I had a plot in order to show the difference, only bananas and the grass. And then the grass too. Let's say a plot, only grass. The grass was brown because it was dry. But the grass underneath the eucalyptus was green, dark green, growing. And the grass only, and bananas in between. Bananas, 80% had died in the meantime, planted at the same time as the other one, which were flowering, and beautiful. They died and merged, they faded away. 80%, and the other ones were very, very small, not at all at the point to flower, not more at the point to disappear for once at all. And then I said to those two scientists, if, or one day, when you come to the point that we'll be able to produce what we need for our day-to-day, in order to satisfy our day-to-day metabolism in a way so that we get a positive energetic balance and also a positive balance in terms of quantity and quality of established life. On the place, once again, and also considering the whole macroorganism, planet Earth. That's to say, not stealing of one place and bring to the other place, no, on the same place. Then we could say that we would have, or we will have, a syntropic agriculture. But nowadays, there are thousands of people all over the world selling recipes for syntropic agriculture I believe they not even know what is syntropy. Syntropy is, in fact, is a term coming from ancient Greek, the same as entropy. Entropy used to describe, or let's say for processes, the quality of processes which go from more complex form to less complex form, releasing energy to the universe. And syntropy, in the same language, ancient Greek, used to for processes going from simple forms to more complex forms, complexifying or grasping energy from outside, and complexifying it and storing it in form of in more complex forms. This, for example, photosynthesis is one of these processes. But 2 weeks after the small film Life in Syntropy, perhaps you have seen it once, had been sent to the universe, dozens of people in Brazil first, and then hundreds of people all over the world began to offer workshops and consultancy in syntropic agriculture. And one of the guys, he offered a workshop for the production of syntropic beer. And so, I modestly, I'm doing farming. Try to do modestly farming. There is something that is a typical feature of our modern society, are waves of fashions. This is a fashion, and then everyone is big mouth selling recipes for syntropic agriculture, for holistic farming, for sustainable. And the most sustainable enterprise in the world, you know, is bio, without doubt. It's most sustainable. You read their propaganda. Sorry? Yeah, it's convincing, the propaganda they make. And so it's the same thing of all these syntropics who sell their recipe.
And can you answer his question about how big the area has to be for their terrain to
this
come?
I will answer to you. It's about, according to the place. In a place like Denmark, it would be sufficient having 200 to 300 hectares, because you are close to the sea. It's all close to the sea, and you have still a more or less intact ecosystem. It's not intact, but it's much closer to be intact that if you go to the Sahara, it's more difficult. If it were in the Sahara, you need at least 2,000 to 3,000 hectares, and if it were that's to say, transformed, planted in a way, not irrigating, with using no natural strategies and processes, and if you were able to do that, then having 2,000 to 3,000 hectares green, evergreen all over the year without any irrigation, then you would have the possibility to bring back rain. But in those places, you would have to begin close to the sea, or at least on the bottom of a big, long body, in the direction of the main direction of a wind. Then it will function easier. If you do it on the that's to say, scattered in different places, it will not function. In our situation, I had the privilege to buy 500 hectares, 150 hectares, and the place is, that is, it's a place with 17 small creeks, origin of the place, and they flow together, go to the sea, exactly in the direction of the main wind. This is in southern hemisphere, south east. And so I bought it exactly for that reason. And I had 350 hectares without forest, some grasses, ferns, and some small bush trees. And I reforested that without the use of fertilizer, without the use without the use of lime, despite the fact that the pH was between 3.7 to 4.2 for the best places 4.5. And 10 years later, it was completely different. We had the rain of our own, but I have another privilege still. Not only this 350 hectares, but plus 150 hectares, which are on the farm. 2 neighbors, they asked me to look at that to care for about 700 hectares of them connected with our ones. And so this gives a great dynamic. That's to say, so you have the influence, a strong influence on the climate on the place. But if you plant, if you plant even in the desert, a small spot might be 500, 600 square meter of plants adapted to that climate. You will cool down the place, and you will create the conditions for other more demanding plants to come up. But this will not yet change the climate of the region. It will only change if the place, let's say, you will have the rain of your own from a moment onward that the dynamic is sufficient to create something like a pump. Let's say to lower the pressure of low pressure, and then sucking the air from other places. Yeah, and if you can do it from the sea, then it's better even.
That was the last question, so thank you very much, Ernst.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm glad, or I'm happy for your attention, and I thank you that you didn't kill me for something like rude annotations I made from